can be consuming that. We have not generated a UI service now, but we would be going through that as well. When I talk about a backend service, it contains of a DB as well as SRV module, right? And dedicated to this service, for example, currently we are working with an employee service. We would have a data container, right? So when I say I do have a data container, that data container would be something that would be containing its tables, its views, anything we use. But we are currently at table level, correct? So when I say I am at table level, it means dedicated to this employee service, whatever data container I do have, it contains the real data. Okay, and here we are generating a CAP service for what purpose? For transactional capability of employee portal. Consider I want one more CAP service, or I can say I want one more application that can give me some sort of employee dashboard where I can have all the information relevant to employee being presented in my output. That would be a view only one. Perfect. But the data source, when I think of a read only application, it should have a data source. So when I think of a data source that it should be able to derive the data from here, the issue would be I would be trying to intervene into an already running application as the data is also contained in the actual running application. Correct? So the reusability of this particular CAP data container, which is containing the actual data, would become a bit difficult. I'm not saying impossible. It would become a bit difficult, and there would be a kind of a hard dependency that would get generated. That in case any sort of logic has been changed, this whole project would be pushed onto the production, and intentionally or unintentionally, it may also hamper my running application employee dashboard. And there are very less chances that my application database would be changed, but there are very good chances that its running capability, or let's just say its functionality, would be changed. It means there may be some change in the SRV, which is so obvious depending on the requirement. We can expect that service architecture would be changed, but it's very less likely that the database type, it's all the database artifact would be changed. It's very less likely to occur. But still, many a time whenever you are working on a one project, there are chances that it might bring whole application down. Okay, so instead, if we jump onto our first concept of microservices, where we can have a dedicated microservice for a DB provisioning. Okay, where we would have a separate HANA DB module, or I can say in terms of HANA, a native HANA project whose purpose would be to contain, purpose would be to store, contain, or provide the data, or I can say the actual data. Okay. So this would be a centralized data container. But whenever I am saying a CAP project would be there, then it would have a data container. But whenever you are actually, going with a separate data container, then in that case, the actual storing of data would occur over here. And rather than having any sort of tables over here, it would have a, I can say, okay, fine. Rather than having any sort of tables over here, it would have a synonym, or I can say remote connection for data to the remote service. Okay, so this particular data container would only contain the views. I mean, let's just say I do have two tables, but I want to show the data aggregated or some sort of formatted in a way which user is asking for. I can generate a view on top of that. That is also we would be seeing in some time. The synonym we can also have, which is a connection to this particular data container, which is containing a table for employee data, and this is something we can contain, or we can say we can connect. So we can create a native HANA project which can have a HANA database module and which would be responsible for all the data that is being flowed. Okay, and using this concept, we would be able to achieve the modularization. So now, even though I do have one service running or two service running, the actual data, wherever it would be coming from, it would be from my central DB container and not from the another running service. Okay. So for example, okay, let's just go over here and I can say, let me just close this. I don't want this running. I'll just close this. Okay, let's just create one more project. I can say, I'll just go into file. I can say new project from template. Now, what kind of project are we willing to create? We are not willing to create any sort of this project, but we are intentionally willing to create a HANA database project. Okay, which whose purpose would be just to contain the data relevant to HANA. I'll just say next. Here we can give any sort of name. So I can say BTP DB employee central. My bad. Yeah. So we would be having a employee central database. That central database we would be using for all our data provisioning purpose. I'll just go next. We would have a DB module. So as we have a DB and SRV in CAP project, same way we do have a DB module over here. I'll just go next. Then we have to give some sort of namespace if we want to. Okay, like we gave it in a CAP, but in case of a database, as it would be a reusable one, we ideally avoid giving any sort of namespace. We'll just keep it as a blank. In case you want to give any sort of names, schema name, we can give. So for example, I'll just say BTP underscore DB underscore employee central. Okay, and we would be right now not generating any Cloud Foundry instance. If we generate like this, we would have a HANA Cloud. Yeah. Now, this is my schema name. If I just go one more step further, then it would ask whether you want to generate any HDI. Now, one thing I guess by now you would also be knowing, whenever I say HDI, it is nothing but my HANA database container. I mean, it's called HANA database instance, but ultimately what it generates is a database container. So whenever someone says you HDI, it means it is nothing but a HANA database container. This is what you can visualize of. So I can say no, right now I don't want to. We would generate it separately. And where actually we want it to be stored. So for example, I want it to be stored in a HDI DB dev HDI shared. I'll just say finish. So all we are currently trying to do is, rather than having all the data getting stored over here, rather than having tables getting generated from CAP project, we would be generating the table and all the HANA artifact in a HANA database project, and we would be consuming this going forward. If you want to see everything at once, I guess we should have a projects open. It just opened this project dedicatedly because it was only asking us to actually focus over here. Okay. So now we are in a DB Central. If you see, what do we have over here? We do have a DB over here. This is a module where we would be writing the code to generate all of our tables. Yes. Let's just open this. Okay. Now what do we have over here? We do have a SRC. So SRC is nothing but a source. So what this DB should contain, that everything would come from a SRC. That everything would actually come from this SRC. Okay, and we do have a dedicated MTA YML. So unless if you see, whenever we were working with a CAP project, we were generating a MTA file. Okay, but whenever you are working with a native HANA project, that would be by default in nature a MTA project. Okay, now if you remember, we had also added this target container explicitly because the MTA file was something that we generated using a command. Do we remember what was that? That was a CDS add MTA. So that particular command we used to generate a MTA file for the deployment purpose of a CAP project. But when it comes to a DB native HANA project, this project is by default a MTA based project. It does have a HANA container. In case we want, we can give it a dedicated name. For example, I'll just say HDI underscore employee central. So this is my central database. Now this is a resource, right? So if I change the name of resource, what should I change? I should also change the name of the requires module. So I'll just change that. It does have a schema. It means whatever tables get generated would be part of a single schema. Okay. Now we are over here. Now in the SRC, we can generate different kind of HANA artifact. Here in the agenda, I have mentioned 3, but we would be learning plenty of them because this is how HANA Cloud is segregated. What all kind of information a HANA Cloud can contain. So it can contain a table, a view, roles, and everything. If you want more detail, you can open this hidden in file HDI config. So if you just click on this, if you see, it can contain HDBL application name, calculation view, the txt file, create table, database function, index, and everything. Okay, so it contains all this information. I'll just close this for now. Okay, now I want to generate a table. Okay, that should store my employees information. Okay, so I'll just go over here in my SRC. Whatever thing that we want to generate, we should write it in a SRC. So in case I want to write a table, there is no convention as such, but I myself prefer segregating, or I can say separating out all the different kind of database artifact on in a folder. So for example, if I want to generate a tables, I'll just say tables over here. Hey, sorry, not over here. It should be in a SRC. Actually, there is some issue with my mouse. 1 second. Okay. Here you would be finding whether it's getting generated at right path or not. So I'll just say tables. I'll just go over here in the tables over here. Now I want one table to get generated. For example, I'll just give a new file. Okay. And here I would try to generate a table. So whenever we are generating a component or database artifact in a HANA one, we have a extension based concept. Okay. So we have to generate a file with a right set of extensions. So for example, I want to generate an employee. I want to generate a table for employees, and here I can say HDB table, and I'll just say create, or I can say OK. So it would generate a file. Now this particular file is ultimately responsible for generating that particular table. Okay. Now we, I hope we all are also aware of HANA system, right? And there are plenty of concept called data compression is into place. We do have column based indexing, and all the columns are having an index tables and everything. Why is that so? Because the table that we are generating over here are a column table, correct? So we do have two kind of table in HANA system. One is row based table, where if I do have a data, or I can say I do have a set of data like this, then my scanning as well as insertion and everything would go row by row. That is called a row table. But whenever I do have a column table, instead of going row by row, it would do all the searching, indexing, and everything based on a column. That is a property of HANA. That's why always create a column table in a HANA system. So I'll just go over here and I'll say, I want a column table to get generated. So the moment you start typing, you would get a value help. So I can say, I want a column table to get generated. Now here I can give a name of the table. So for example, I want to give, let's just say empdb dot, let's just say employees. So for example, I want to some sort of namespace. So these are namespace. Why I avoid giving this namespace in the project generation time? Because I want a different namespace for different purpose. I want a namespace for view. I want a namespace for table. I can also choose that. So that's why I just didn't give any namespace at the project creation level. Now here I have to give all the column that I want to generate. Okay. So this is nothing but your pure Oracle SQL based Oracle SQL type database generation. You do have a schema. You have to define what all thing your table should contain, what all thing your views should contain, all the column, its name, its particular, I can say data type, what is the primary key, any constraint you want to write, everything and anything you would be specifying over here. So for example, I want to have an ID column. What would be the type? So one thing, there are two kind of data types. Whenever I am going with a cap, then cap ideally have a data type called string, integer, okay, some sort of timestamp, or I mean, all the cap data types are this sort of primitive data type. Whenever I say I do have a HANA, it would come up with a SQL data types. What do I mean by SQL data type? While writing any sort of SQL script or any sort of SQL table generation, how do I give the measure? How do I give what is the kind of my table, or let's just say what is the type of my column? I can give n varchar, varchar, let's just say a timestamp, okay, a boolean, this sort of thing. So these are my SQL data types. If you just say control space over here, you would start getting all of them. So for example, I want n varchar, I can say n varchar. If you see, it is giving me a help. I want it of 36 character because I want to replace my this employee table over here, which is a table currently. And how do I know it is a table? We have seen that, right? We open our data container. We had opened our data container sometime back in a HANA cloud. We would be opening it also again. So that particular data container, this CUID is generating a ID of 36 character, right? And what is this internally? This is a table. But whenever I am saying employee service, this is generating a view. But as this is a table, I don't want also it to be a table. I also want it to be a synonym of view. And that view would be getting the data from the table that we are generating. So I don't want this to be a table anymore. Okay, and that's why I am generating a particular table in a centralized container. So for example, I do have ID, which is getting auto generated. So for example, I also want to give some sort of ID, which the user can also manipulate in. Okay, so this from a future perspective, as a part of one of the capabilities of CAP, we would be learning. I am also introducing one column called, let's just say, um, EMP ID EXT. EXT, it means whatever external, whatever is something that would be visible to the user. Okay. So for example, we generated, I can say, we had generated one short of GUID, right? This sort of GUID we used while actually adding any sort of information to the database because this is a unique ID. But can I, if an employee enters in my organization, can I tell him, okay, this is your employee ID, just remember this? It would be very hectic, right? But instead, what would be his employee ID? This is an ID, which would be a unique ID, which would be stored for sure. But when I say a employee ID, it would be something that an employee can remember. I can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This sort of employee ID it would be. Or for example, it would be Sumit underscore 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or anything. But this is something that the employee can remember. So I can say an external purpose. We want something which would be unique in itself and something which would be easy for the employee to remember. So he can think this as his employee ID. Okay, so that's why we generated it like this. Now, I want it to be, let's just say, of 255 characters. Along with this, what do we have? We do have name, email ID, and department. So I can say, I want a name, which would be again 255 character, email ID, and I can say department, be a department ID, because we have a remote, I can say, reference relation. Again, it would be a 36 character. Now, along with this, we are also giving some sort of managed aspect. So when I say I am giving a managed aspect, what it would generate? It would generate 4 more columns, right? Created by and all this. So we should have a column with the exact name. So I can say created at over here. Just close this. We are over here. I can say I want a created at column. Let me just type that. Created at, and whenever I say created at, it is nothing but a timestamp that we are storing that when this record was created. Then I want a created by. Remember, whenever I do have a synonym, whenever I am connecting a centralized database table and I want to expose that, the name of the column should match exactly. Okay, why is it so? Because if it doesn't match, the system won't be knowing from which column I can pick the data for the relevant column. Okay, so here I want this, and let's just say the created by. In case I want a created by, what I can get it as a, let's just say here it is maximum length 255. So I can say and varchar 255. I want same for the modified at. Okay, so we generated a table which is having all this information. Along with that, whenever I am saying I am generating a table, what it should have definitely a primary key. Here it is saying it is a key. So if I want to give the same information in a particular database table, I can say I do have a primary key. And here you can specify n number of keys specified by colon, whatever you like. I do have only one primary key, so I'm just specifying it over here like this. So this would, or I can say this should generate a table for me that should have an ID as a primary key, and the name of the table would be empdb table dot employees. Okay, so this is how I would be able to generate a table. This is just a first step in the I can say space of a native HANA that would build our database space. We are already working on our controller space, or I can say our application server space. And we would be generating a UI application as well. So if you think of, we are generating a full Srisha, I think you pinged the name. Okay, one second. Okay, so these are the names, right? So created at by. Hello.
Yes, Sumit. Because before you are writing, so I have just
Okay,
pinged
okay.
this.
For the help you just pinged. Okay, yeah.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes.
Thank you. I thought okay, I might have wrote something right. So yeah,
No,
just
no, 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 no.
okay.
Before that only I have written.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, I just missed that maybe. Thank you. Okay, so this is our first step in the modularization. So we are splitting our database module separately, and we just created our table. So any questions till now? Maybe you won't be able to visualize these tables at least for now till the time we don't deploy it. But then I guess it would become more clear. But do we have any questions? Any clear?
Sumit,
Sorry, I think your voice is a bit low. Can you please be a bit louder?
Sumit, now it is okay.
It's
Hello.
bit, yeah. I can hear you, but it seems yeah like you are speaking from too far.
Now it is okay.
Yeah, it's better. Yeah.
Yeah. So same table we can use for the multiple projects for the.
Exactly, yeah. We can use that. So this would become your data source. So if you remember, we do have empty YML over here. We do also have an empty YML for our backend service. Here you can add as data source, or I can say a resource. This would be in my one CAP project. If I generate another CAP project, I can have a same resource, right?
Okay, just like an SC11 dictionary.
Exactly. Yeah, you are generating an EKKO being used by 15 odd of applications.
So you are telling that instance means just like an internal table you are doing for a report.
I can't say an internal table, it's a database table.
No. Why I'm asking means you are creating the DB level container, and further you are using in some other project means just like an instance you are going to create, right?
Yeah. So you can't say an instance, I can say a static instance.
Yeah, static. Okay.
Static instance, because at the real time, if one application is changing that, another application would get the same copy.
Oh, okay, Suresh.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, we do have a table now. Now there is one more interesting concept. Okay, I can say, okay, yeah, perfect. Now, one more interesting concept we do have over here is whenever we are having a table, then for the security purpose, what what the security concept says is we should always avoid, we should always enable only the views to be exposed. Okay, so for the security concept, let's just say you do have a centralized DB container, and in the centralized DB container, you do have a table. You are creating a view on top of that. Okay, then only expose this view to the rest of the application, because this table may be vulnerable, or this table can be intercepted by another, I can say, security breach, and it might create some sort of security issue. Okay, so always try to create a version 1 view on top of the table. So whenever I do have a table, I do have 15 odd columns. Always create a just a view which is blindly selecting data from this and expose it to the world outside. So once you are exposing that to the world outside, let's just say this DB model would be able to use that, but never allow anyone to use the table directly, because security wise that is more vulnerable to the issues. Secondly, whenever you are working with a Hana artifact, Hana component, you do have a DCL, right? The data control language. That I only want a set of user who are authorized to use the relevant data. I don't want everyone and anyone to use all the data. Okay. So when I am applying a data control language, it's very easy, very straightforward to apply the data control language on a view rather than doing it on a table. Okay, so what we would be doing is we do have this particular table. Okay, now we would be creating a view on top of that. Okay, so whenever we would be creating a view, that view is something that we would be consuming in a remote application, not the actual table. Okay, so what we would be doing is we would be just creating one more folder over here. I can say SRC. I would have a new folder called views, for example. And like we created HDB table, we will also say employees dot HDB view. I can say view, like we mentioned over here, EMPDB table employees. Same kind of namespace we can give over here. I can say EMPDB views, and here you can name it as a V underscore V1. It means it's a version 1. It is a direct fetching from the database. Like we have a SC11 views where we can have a projection view, as a part of which we are just projecting few columns from one table. But we can have a database view, or I can say I can have a view where
Just like a CDS view, right?
yeah, kind of a CDS view you can also think of. Yeah. So in a CDS view where we can have more than one data source where we are combining multiple data and presenting in the output form. That won't be your V1 view. V1 view, it means only one data source. You are just directly projecting the column, no intervention in between. Why it is called V1? Because here create, update, delete, or I can say any database capability is enabled. But whenever you are going with a V2, or I can say a V plus view, V1 plus views, issue would be if I do have one database table, I do have another database table. I do have column number 1, column number 2, column number 3, column number 4. I am joining this 1 is equal to 3. So I do have a view called 1, 2, and 4. Then I won't be able to do any sort of create, update, delete, because while generating a view, I can give an alias. While generating a view, I can get the data from any data source. So system won't be able to recognize that directly, that which particular column is coming from which table. Okay, and that is why the V1 view are create, update, delete enabled. But going forward, if your database view are getting generated via joins, CUD would be disabled. Create, update, delete would be disabled by default. So we would be generating a V1 view where you would be writing view this as select, I can say all the column. Now there are two ways. Either you can directly specify the list of columns as well, or you can also say star. Okay, so I'll just say list of column, whatever I want to expose. Because many a time what happens is certain thing would be there you would not like to expose. Then also it is totally fine. And in that case, it's always preferable that you go column by column. I can say from what would be my data source? My data source would be this particular. So I selected this column from this particular view from this table and I generated this view. Now I do have a table as well as view as a part of my DB project. Now, even though I do have this DB central, if I deploy that, it would be visible publicly in my data container, but still none of the applications in the world outside would be able to use that. Okay, because there is a concept of security called role management. There is a concept of security called role management. Each and everything that you want to be accessible to the world outside, you should define a role. For example, in our school days, in college days, you remember we used to have, let's just say, any sort of table you created. Now you want to grant some sort of a select access, or I can say a read access to a set of application, to a set of user. Then you are defining a set of role that grant this select only if they do have a role assigned called XX underscore read role. If you want to give some sort of a insert, delete all the privileges, then you are also creating a dedicated role. So these are the same database concepts, okay, which Hana is also following, because Hana is also in itself a database. So if you are creating a separate role, and let's just say there is a one application which is coming saying I want a dashboard to get generated, which is a read only application. What you would say is, okay, go with this read role, add this role in your application, and your application should be able to read the data. Let's just say there is a transactional application which is coming, which is saying, okay, I want to have a capability of a create, update, delete. Then you would give him a role which is having a CUD capability. Okay, so this way you would be generating a role for the different purposes. So same way in the Hana as well, we have to generate one role. And what is that it in itself? It's nothing but a Hana artifact again. So I'll just say in the SRC, I'll generate one more thing. I'll just right click new folder, roles. So I do have a role now. So like we generated HDB table, HDB view, same way we would generate HDB role. So for let's just say read only purpose, I am generating a read only dot HDB role. you right click, I think it's taking some time. Let's wait. Okay, so if I just right click over here, it's again freezing. I do have an option of open with a code editor. So I'll just open the code editor over here. Now you do have a space where you can write your all the specifications. So I want a role. So I want a role name. So the moment you, okay, if you see all the things in itself is nothing but a kind of a JSON kind of thing. Okay. The moment you specify double inverted comma, it would provide you all the permissible properties. So for example, here role is the only one. I can say role. Now you have to again a curly bracket. If you see, you are directly getting the name that you should be providing a name. So I can say ideally you can give any name you want, but I myself prefer giving a name along with the schema kind of thing, or let's just say some sort of identity. So it would be very easy for us to identify it going forward. So for example, here I do have a DB underscore EC. Okay, for example, I am saying BTP EDEC DBEC for central, and I can say double colon because that's my way of writing. And you can say read only. So this is my read only role. So whoever is seeing this role would be able to identify that this is for this data container with this schema, and it's a read only role for this. You can choose anything you want. Okay. Now you would get multiple things. This sort of information you can specify that I can give a privilege, object level privilege, whether I want them to be read available or only available for writing, what sort of process any sort of consuming application can do. If you want to give some sort of schema privilege, let's just say I want anyone to do the alter, anyone to do some sort of create, update, delete, anything. So here we would be providing object level privileges. Okay, and here if I just say enter, now I would be specifying the list of object. So here I do have multiple options. So I can say name. In the name, you would be providing the name of the component you want to get exposed. So I don't want to expose the table. Instead, I only want the view to get exposed. So I'll just specify it like this. Then you have to specify what it is. So the moment you specify type, you do have multiple options. Now a view in itself is stored in a form of a table, and that's why the type over here will always also be a table. So you have to specify table over here. Now you do have to specify privilege, like what all things you want the consuming application to do. So you do have multiple options. I want, if it's a read role, I want that the consuming application should only be able to select the data. Okay, so that is a purpose of a read only role, that whoever is consuming this particular role should be able to just select the data. He should not be able to do anything else. Okay, so that is a meaning of a read only role. Now I should be also able to create a write role as well, where the uh, the scope, the capability of the role would be bit higher. So for example, I want to have a write.hdb role. So there is a wizard editor, but we ideally prefer going by this because it gives us a more, I can say value help. It gives us a more options of what all thing can be performed. Now, we have a role, and like we would keep everything kind of symmetric. I can have a name. In the name, I'll just specify along with this read only, I can say now this is a write role. Okay, and what I'll be specifying over here is object privileges. I want to specify that this is my name of this particular object, and I want the write role also for this view. I have to specify the type. And here I would be giving the privileges that I want the write. Now write is capable of doing many things. When I say write, it means I should be able to view the data, then I should be able to delete the data. In case I want to insert or change anything, I should also be able to. So I can say in select, insert, for example, update. And if I want anyone to also delete, I can do that. Depending on your application, many a time what happens is many application should not be granted delete. You can avoid that as well. Yes, Sirisha, you want to say something?
Alter also can take it.
Sorry, you are again, I mean, I can't hear you. Your voice
Alter.
is again a bit low.
Alter.
Yeah, alter. So if you see, there are a few things. Um, we are working on a data level, right? So when I
Yes.
say a data level, data can be have select, insert, update, delete. When I say alter, purpose of alter is to change the architecture as well. If I want to add one more column, I can say alter.
Okay.
Correct. So that's a
Yes.
different, yeah, you would be able to find those over here, but it has a different altogether purposes. When I do have a database procedure, I can have a privilege called execute. Likewise.
Modify also, debug, modify also, we can take it, right?
Yeah. So we do have multiple kind of roles. Whenever I am thinking of a write role, this is my own convention. Okay. So when I say write role, that write role is depending on application, the kind of data you are creating. So for example, for you, write is, let's just say, income tax data. You want everything to be logged. Even if someone is doing something, he should not be able to delete anything. So for you, write role can be something which is not having delete as well.
Okay. Depending upon the data, we can give. Okay.
Exactly how sensitive data is, what sort of behavior you want to, and that's why it's not a default generated template. You are providing the role based on your application's requirement.
Okay, fine. So, okay.
Okay. Now, this is the role which I can say a application would be gaining whenever they are consuming this role in their application. For example, if I add it in an employee, these are the role that application would be gaining, and they would be able to perform this activity on my view. That internally it would be perform on my table. Now, there are one more role. Okay. For example, think of a real life scenario where you have a friend who is saying that, hey, I trust you, so I am giving you I can say authority that this is my bike, have a key of it. In case you want to use that, use it. Okay, so it means you are getting a right of execute. Technically saying, your friend gives you the right to execute, or I can say use his bike. You are not only asked to view his bike just by standing in front of him, but you can use it. But let's just say you do have a friend who is saying, okay, along with using this bike, if you want to let someone also else use that, if he is in a need of that, do that. So what it is, so ultimately there are two kind of role. I can say privileges, and there are one more thing, privileges with grant option. When I say privileges with grant option, what does that mean? If we are allowing application that you can do insert, update, delete, but in case, as I mentioned, okay, we do have a CAP project which is containing a data container. So if it is consuming this external resource, it would have this view. In case for any purpose, someone else, some other application start using this data container of my CAP application as a remote data source, what all thing it should contain? Oh, sorry, what all thing it should be allowed? The consuming application of my CAP application, what all thing it should be allowed? I can say that is called privileges with grant option. That myself I am granting you insert, update, delete. But whenever you have been asked that can I use your view, and as a part of which can I use your data container, as a part of which you do have a synonym, which again one more layer application. So you do have one DB layer application. Second one is your CAP application. So this DB has a view. This CAP has a synonym. Now, yeah, there is a third application. It can be anything. Let's just visualize it as a CAP. So this in first application has a remote data source as a DB module, the first one. Now this CAP project, rather than connecting it over here, he is again connecting to CAP project. So for example, he is connecting to remote data source, which is a CAP one. It means it's a number 2, index 2. This is what it is trying to connect. Then definitely, as I do have a, okay, let me just also open this, and I guess it would be more clear. When I say a database schema, what it would be? A schema would be all the list of bunch which I showed you: table, view, table type, synonym, procedure, function, everything. Again, you remember, I guess after 24 hours, it would stop my database connections. That's how the trial version is working. So I guess we have to make it up. Okay. I guess for our future purpose, we'll just, I mean, start the instance. But yeah, we'll discuss. I guess as you can see, it is stopped. I'll just put a cursor and just say start. Now it should start and it should be there in running mode in some time. Okay, so till the time it starts, what we were discussing is that whenever I am saying a remote data source is a CAP, but a data source can contain a table, it contain a view, it contain a synonym, it can contain a procedure, anything, right? So if my data source is CAP, then it would also have a synonym, and this synonym would also become a data source for the again consuming application like this. But this synonym are nothing but a borrowed one, right? These are the something that it has borrowed from this DB. Then what all things, what all capability it can hand over to again next child level CAP application, that would be specified in a privilege with grant option. Okay, so it means whenever I am defining a view, or sorry, whenever I am defining a role can be native for a application usage. This role can also be with the capability of granting. Okay, so for example, I want to have a read role, but I also want that in case someone is consuming my consuming application of a DB, then it should have a I can say rolled over, or I can say it should have a privileges whichever are getting cascaded, whichever are getting passed on, and what all thing it should. So I can say just pass on the privilege with the full capability. I can do that. So I can say HDB role. So for the granting purpose, I am saying G. So I'm just following any naming convention just to easily identify that.
Sumit, I have a doubt. Like, so already in
Sorry, your voice is again a bit low. Can you please come
no,
again?
no, no. Already in that read-only rule, already we have an option like in object privileges with grant. One option is there. There itself we can give it, right? Why we
Yeah.
want to go for another thing?
Okay. I'll answer that as well. Okay. So there is a constraint, or there is a role, or there is a rule, I can say. Whenever you are generating a normal role,
Okay.
this is how the naming convention would be. But whenever you are generating a DB role with a grant option, what should be the name? The name should contain whatever you want to, but there is one more important thing it should contain. It should contain a hash. So this hash is must. Whenever you are saying hash, it means it is getting cascaded.
Mhm.
So due to this naming convention, we have to create a separate role, that what all thing I want to pass it on. And that's why you can't have both of them in a single one.
One, you click next and you click the control, you will get an option like privileges with grant, right?
So
The
the
same.
thing is, this is a I can say value help, or I can say some sort of code completion suggestion you are getting. But whenever you are going to build it, whenever you are going to deploy it, it would fail with a name saying you are trying to generate, or let's just say you are having a, okay, you are saying over here, you are
Yes.
trying to add the privilege with grant option, but it would fail saying the name of the role is not having a hash over here.
Okay. 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 Fine. Okay. Fine.
So this is the kind of thing I am just sharing from experience. Maybe one, I guess you can give it a try, but it would fail for sure, because it is, I have faced the same thing.
No, no, no. Why? Because I already have seen in a drop
No,
down,
no,
right? So
definitely.
that's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, I mean, I had tried that. I was
Okay.
also kind of curious why to maintain one more file.
Okay. Okay. Fine, Sumit. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Now, here we have again the same thing that we have to specify. I can say object privilege over here, and here we would be specifying the what all object we want to pass the privileges on. And it gives us one more liberty, that for some object we want the granting to be allowed, and for some we don't want to. So I guess if we do have a separate file, we would get that option. Okay. So I guess maybe we can kind of, many a time, if something is not some things are not possible, we can try to convince ourselves by looking at the positive side. What would be the positive side if we are not having this? That sort of thing. I can say select. So I would have a view. Now I want also to grant role created for this particular thing. I think I missed something. Okay, it was a name. That's why I thought, okay, why it is not giving me the option. Okay, there is a role and it would have a name.
Bracket.
So kind of a nesting. That's why I was thinking, okay, why it is giving me a wrong value suggestion. Okay. We have something to format. So now we do have a role with the native application consumption and the one with the grant option. So what we can think of now is now we do have a MTA as well over here. Okay, so these, if you see, these my HANA database type, it would generate a database for me whenever I am deploying this project. It would have this data container. To make it more meaningful, let's just also give the name in a way that we should be able to identify that correctly. So I can say, rather than giving it a DB, because if I'm deploying 5 more project, it would have a DB module, but I want it to be more meaningful. And these modules are something that would be generated as a service. Okay. So for example, if I just go over here in the running application, what you would find? You would find a service with the name BTP BE employee SRV, a service with BTP BE employee DB. If I just go over here, applications. Okay, so let me refresh this. Can you see BTP BE employee SRV, BTP BE employee DB likewise? Okay. So it means these modules are something that is getting considered while generating its relevant services. So I can say BTP DB okay, and do we have this particular module running? Yeah, it's running for us. Perfect. Now, what we were discussing some time back that we are not able to. Now, if you see, yeah, in case you are also facing some issue, you are not able to load any of this, you can, after fixing the thing, you can directly refresh it from here and it should refresh. You are not required to refresh whole page. Now, this is what I was talking about. This is my whole data container. Okay, and it has a views, a synonym and everything. So in case some other application start using that, then he or that particular application would also get that cascaded. Okay. Now I am at the application level. Now I want to deploy this. So what I'll do, I'll just go to my MTA application. So I hope you remember we had done this earlier. I would say build MTA project. So can you see what it just did? It just generated MTA archive. So we do have an MTA archive available with me. Now I want to connect my system with over here. So I should actually log into CF. I can say CF login. This is API endpoint default one. Submit.aoh. So I am now connecting to the relevant service. Now I have to deploy that. So I'll just say right click and I can say deploy MTA archive. So it should start with the deployment. It is deploying BTP DB EMP Central. It is creating the service HDI employee central. This is a data container it is trying to create. Now, if you see it just say one of one done, it was able to create the service HDI employee central. It means the data container just got created. It's still under process. Now it is creating the BTP DP employees under what? Applications. So can you see it is called applications. So I guess after you spend some time over here, maybe I can say sometime while working with a BTP CAP, you would be able to identify each and every wording. So what does it, how does an application start? So if you see, it would upload a copy, it would start the application, whatever it generated, then it would scale it. When I say scale, that it would identify, okay, how much amount of space I should do, I should allocate to that. When I say I should, how much amount of space, it means it would depend on the data, the kind of artifact, the number of artifact it contain. It would provide the space according to how much space it would need. Then it would do the staging. Okay, it would do that space allocation and the address, memory address allocation and everything. And once the application is staged, it would then deploy it and then it would start the application in reality. Okay, so these are the steps, or I can say this is something that would come in the life cycle of application activation, and you should be getting a process finished. In case you are getting processed failed, then you again have to observe what went wrong. Okay. Now, if I just go over here, let's just say in my application space, I'll just refresh this. Okay, I think I just got that by default. There was an auto refresh on the page. Okay, so can you see BTP DB employees? Okay, and one more thing you would have observed, I mean, in the last session as well, we created these two service. This was something which was running by default. Now, as the BTP shuts everything down after 24 hours, this would be stopped just by looking at it. But the DB module is something that would be by default stopped. Okay, it won't be a running module. Instead, it would be a stop module. It would get this particular quota allocated to that by default. And if you see, if you just see the logs, in case something fails, okay, this is what it was doing internally, deploying all the roles. Can you see? All the roles and everything, all the tables and view that we created just got deployed. In case you would have, let's just say, added anything else as well, it would have done that. So ultimately, these are the logs. In case something fails, you would be able to find it in the application's log. Okay, that is also very much important. Rather than just doing a development, how to figure out what is happening in the background. That's also very much important and required. Now we have all the things. Now I want to add one more container. So by default, when you refresh, you won't find anything. I told you how we can do that. You do have a plus sign over here. So when I say I do have a plus sign, what you want to add? I want to add a HDI container. So if you click over here, what was the name of the container we named over here? It was HDI employee central. Can you see something? HDI employee central. Yeah, over here. I'll just say okay. Now I do have a table and I do have a view. Depending on what is you are creating, you would find that particular relevant database artifact in the relevant database node. Here we don't have a synonym, so you won't find any. In case you are generating a procedure, these also we would be going through how I can generate a procedure, how I can generate a functions, and you would be able to find that as well. So in case I open this, you would be able to. And when we also specified some sort of schema, can you see it's a BTP DBEC? We specified that right over here. We specified the config schema over here, and that's why we do have it over here. But in case you see in the CAP application, we chose not to specify. I mean, in the CAP application as well, there is a provision of specifying the schema, but we did not. Okay, just to learn multiple flavors of application development. So if we don't specify the schema, an application would still need a schema. Okay, so if you see here, we do have it, here we don't. The BTP employee, if I just go over here, if I just say tables, I do have an employee table, but if I click over here, what is the schema name? It is something which is getting generated arbitrarily. It's not very uniform. It's not something readable. That is why a schema name is something that we should also provide. Okay. So this all things would come. I mean, by experience, by time, you would also learn this. So I would like to take a pause and ask, are we all clear? Sayanthani, Sirisha, are we all good till now?
Yes, yes. So
Okay, thank you.
yes,
Sayanthani?
yes.
Okay,
Yes, yes.
perfect. Yeah, thank you. Now we created a centralized database. Now we do have a database. It is standing alone. It does not have anything to do. It's getting bored. So we want it to get consumed somewhere. Okay, where actually it makes sense. Okay, and for that we have to learn a concept called synonym. Okay, now we had generated this, but let's just generate one application, a CAP project, because this is something I told you how a CAP works. Now let me just explain you how you should be developing a ideal CAP application. This is something where we do have an internal table, but we do have a table as a part of the CAP application, but this is not how you should be doing that. What is the right development? So I'll just say cd space dot dot. In the project space, let me just also create one good project. So I can say how I can generate a CAP project. I can say CDS in it. I can say BTP BE employee. I can say employee with a transactional capability. Can you see a project just got generated? So I mean, we'll just do a few things which would be very similar, very easy. And here we won't be generating any table directly. Instead, we would be consuming something. Okay. So I'll just say CD BTP BE M trans. I can say now I am over here. I'll just say CDS watch. Okay, so now over here we don't have anything and I want to have some sort of remote sources. So like we have over here, I'll just generate a so transactional application. We would be using something. Okay, and I can say entity over here. Now I want to use an entity. I want to generate one, but what should be the name? So for that, we have to go one more step ahead. I'll just say I want a entity to get generated with the name in the DB central. That should not be exit in the DB central, but I'll okay. Just to make you understand, we would go step by step. Then I can tell you, I would tell you what all things it should contain, the name of the entity. Okay, and what all column does it contain? I want all of this over here as well. I can say CUID manage because I want the ID. So I do not need to write this, and this 4 column I also am not required to write all of this. I'll just go over here. I'll just paste this. But here, if you remember, we would need we would need all the columns, but here the data type, as I mentioned, would be something else. It would be a string. So we just generated the architecture, or I can say how the skeleton would be looking alike. Oh, sorry, it would be a semicolon. Now we would be exposing this as well. Employee transactional. So I am just going smoothly because I have done this. We have done this earlier, and I guess you all know how I can, what all thing a service should contain. Okay, so I want to expose this service now. So I can say entity. I want employees to be exposed as it would be a select from, I can say db dot employees. So I got this information. So it seems the same as it was earlier. There is no difference. I have not connected to the external world till now. So I would need something for that. Right. So what we would do is I'll just say, just stop the service. We don't need this for running for now. We would need a remote source to be specified. How I can do that? For that, we would need a MTA file. So as I can see, I can say CDS add MTA because whenever I have to specify the remote source, we would need a MTA. We would need an MTA, then only it would be able to connect to that. So I can say CDS add MTA. Okay, and here we are. So we should have a MTA available over here. We do have a SRV folder, but we don't have a resources. So what I'll do is I'll just do one more step. You remember we had connected this earlier with something. So I would generate a run configuration. I would say I want one more run configuration to be available. What it would be? It would be for this. Yeah, I can allow the name. It would get generated. So I think this just got generated. If you see over here, okay, we don't have anything available till now over here. We want to connect to Hana system. We had done that earlier. How I can add to the Hana system? We have to open the package.json, right? And along with over here, we had added one more thing. If you remember, we had added in the package.json one more dependency called it would require a HANA database. So I'll just say CDS and it would require the DB of kind HANA. Yeah, okay. It's getting refreshed. Let me just add one more run configuration if it needs. It is taking some time. One second.
Sumit, how you
Yeah, yeah,
have done
please.
this debugging
Hello.
thing?
Sorry.
Sumita, how
Yeah,
you
yeah,
have
please.
done how you have done the debugging? So how you got any option to debug from here also?
Yeah. So these ultimately, whenever it runs, ideally, whenever from this particular service, there is a button called run module. So whenever you run, ideally it would run with a debugging enabled. So in case we do have a custom code where we are actually going to. So in case we do have a custom code, if you put a breakpoint, it would ideally deploy that as well, or it would debug that as well.
Okay, okay, fine, thank you.
And one thing, Smith, like in AppBup, we can set breakpoint, watchpoint like that. Is there any concept or?
Yeah, yeah. So whenever I am saying I'm on a I can say table or a view, these things
Hmm?
data model this cannot be debugged. But when I say I am working on a Node.js based application, so we would be learning how I can write how I can inject my code in the JS files. So those files, whichever are there, we can put a breakpoint and we can put a breakpoint, watch point, and we can debug. Okay,
O-
and we do have a dedicated console as well where we would be able to identify, or I can say we would be able to run it using that.
Okay, okay.
Okay, so now where it went. The module is not an this or separate thing, not an issue. Okay, so I'm looking for some sort of HANA component which is not getting visible. So do we have a package.json save? Oh, yeah, it requires, and I just write required. Yeah, CDS requires DB and kind HANA, and I specified something else, and I guess that was the reason. Let me just go over here. I'll just stop this. Okay, now I'll just go over here. It's getting refreshed. Now, if you see, I do have a DB and HANA connected. Now, if I just connect to this HANA over here, bind, I can say, Where we would be doing that? We would be doing it in the dev HDI shared. It would bind the local instance, try to add the HANA dependencies as well internally. HANA database just got installed. It also add the HANA client. Now it would ask me to deploy it, and I'll just say, okay, deploy my database. So this would be for the local purpose. So it just added HANA system to my over here. I'll just close this. Okay. Now I am in a trans. I'll just say new terminal. Okay. Now over here, I'll just this DB, or I can say empty a file was incomplete. I don't want an incomplete file. I want to add a new one.